Chapter 10. Early next morning, Abel raced back to the book, removed the leaves, and took up reading where he had left off. The masked ball was a happy affair, even though there was talk about the guess of possible war. The main character was a captain in his country's army. He was snout over claws in love with a beautiful young lady, whom he danced a couple of waltzes. Abel had a laugh over one of the bears who was masquerading as a mouse. What he read made him wistful for his normal life, but he still enjoyed reading. After hopping from side to side, eagerly devouring the words, he forced himself to stop at the close of the chapter. He recovered the book with the leaves and went home. There, in case the bears who had left the book behind or anyone else should turn up, Abel made clay tablets like this: Abelard, Massam, di Chirico, Flint, and baked them in his fire. The next day the signs were placed in well-chosen parts of the island, leaning against trees or stones, with the arrow always pointing to his home, the log. He had to drag the tablets along the ground with a rope, they were so large. He noted that there were thin wafers of ice along the shore, and for a moment he had excited visions of a frozen river that could be crossed by walking, but he quickly remembered that such swiftly flowing water could not freeze. He was curious to know if the watch would run. Some prodding and shoving with a pole in the grooves of the stem winder made it turn round a dozen times. The watch began to tick. The sounds he had become accustomed to, the roaring and gurgling of the river, the wailing and the whining of the wind, the pattering and dripping of rain, the chirping of birds and the chirring of insects, had natural, irregular rhythms, which were very soothing, but the steady, mechanical tempo of the watch gave him something he had been wanting in this wild place. It, in the book, helped him feel connected to the civilized world he'd come from. He had no use for the time the watch could tell, but he needed the ticking. Abel led a busy life. He had used up the pages of his scratch pad floating messages down the river, but he still occasionally sent up smoke signals, and, once in a while, futile as it seemed, he would climb a tree and wave a stained and tattered shirt. He had his book to read and think about. There was the winding of the watch to be attended to. He kept working at sculpture, and of course, he had his practical needs to provide for. Abel also kept busy, taking it easy. Only when taking it easy, he'd learned, could one properly do one's wondering. One night, while he was resting under the stars and enjoying the noise of the river and the November wind, a winged shadow suddenly hung over him, blacking out the stars at which he'd been gazing. Instinct brought him to his feet and sent him diving into the crevice between two rocks. In mute terror, he crouched in the crevice while the owl, with grappling talons, tried to fish him out. He stood on the rock and poked in, while Abel made himself smaller and smaller and receded farther and farther into the seam. Then the poking stopped, and the owl scrabbled about on the rock, staring into the night with unfathoming eyes. It took off at last and perched in a tree. Abel could see the dark shape of the owl in the branches above and the vibrating stars beyond. Where had this trespasser come from? Why? Had it perchance seen Abel's signals? He'd been astounded by the stillness with which it had dropped from the sky. There had been no beat, no ruffle of wings. This is bone-chilling to be approached so noiselessly by a winged assassin. Abel's star was up there among the others. It seemed to say, "I see you both." Abel broke from his sanctuary and dashed for the log. The owl was right behind him. Abel ran as fast as his thin, terrible legs would take him. He gasped when the owl seized him. He was snatched and rushed aloft, sick with fear, into the ominous air. He had the wit and just enough strength to pull out his penknife, open the blade, and frantically slash at the owl's horny toes. With a screech, the owl released him, and Abel fell, with no fear at all of falling. He scrambled with awkward haste to his house, plunged in, and barred the entrance with stones. Next moment he felt the owl land on the hollow log, and his innards quivered. Abel crouched motionless in a corner. He could hear the owl shuffle about right above him, a single tail away. As the night advanced, terror turned to resentment. The mouse considered battling the owl with his knife, putting out his stupid eyes with a pointed pole, setting fire to his feathers with a torch, indignant and unfearing. He fell asleep. In the morning, caution returned. He peered from his windows, craning his head upward, and made sure there was no dealer of death on his roof. Most of that day he spent in his bed of milkweed fluff and ventured out only in the late afternoon, carrying over his shoulder a long pole, his open knife tied to the end. After his encounter with the owl, he was extremely wary for a long time, even in full daylight when owls are expected to sleep. Chapter 11. In late November, Abel was on his way home from the book, mulling over a chapter he had just read. The bears were going to war against bears from another country. They were going even though on both sides everyone wanted peace. This was something to think about with so much time to think. The sky was gray, nature looked its drabbest. Abel thought he saw snowflakes not falling, just wandering about in the air. Then there were more, and he felt a few melt on his head. That winter was coming he had known all along, but here was more evidence, and it made him uneasy. Was he as prepared as he ought to be? There was an owl around, too, with nasty intentions. That added to his uneasiness. The environment didn't seem altogether friendly. In the dead grass he saw a gray-brown feather. Certain that it could only be the owl's, he took it home. There he poked the quill into the soft, rotting wood of his floor where it stood erect, a sort of talisman. He owned something of the owl's, from his very body, but the owl had nothing of his. This gave him a sense of advantage, at least for the moment. He found himself uttering an incantation at the feather, not knowing where the words came from. Foul owl, ugly you, you'll never get me, whatever you do. You cannot hurt me, you cannot kill. You're in my power, I have your quill. He felt he was casting a spell over the detested bird of prey that would paralyze its evil force. After this, out in his yard in the light descending snow, Abel addressed Amanda's statue as if it were she herself. Amanda, he said, I am safe. Then he went indoors and worked at making himself a winter cape with a hood. He wove 2 layers of cloth and the fine filaments of grass, and sandwiched in between the 2 layers some of the milkweed fluff he'd stored in the log. Still full of forebodings of a hard winter, he foraged about for what was sure was the last edible stuff on the island. Bare seeds, dry berries, mushrooms. He crammed his room full of these viands. Perhaps it was more than he would need to see the winter through, but he had no way of knowing. Anyway, his abundant store caused or eased his misgivings. Engrossed one day in these practical chores, he was shocked to see the owl again up on a branch in a tree near his house. It was asleep, but its erect posture, like that of a sentinel of hell, its eyes, with which even shut seemed to stare, the tight grasp of its talons on the bow, and the bloody sunset in the sky behind it filled poor Abel with wintry dread. He hurried home, his heart tripping. What should he do? Could he possibly kill the obnoxious creature while it slept, so it would die as if in a dream? How? With a rock on the end of a rope, with fire, with a burning javelin of wood. So many birds had gone south. Oh, why not the owl? Was an owl really a bird? What an odd, unheavenly bird. Abel, back in his log, knelt in prayer and asked a question he had asked before, though never so urgently. Why did God make owls? Snakes, cats, foxes, fleas. Oh, they're such loathsome, abominable creatures. He felt there had to be a reason.